Hello everyone, thanks for joining this breakout session on PPP. This is of course a topic which is of great interest, particularly over the last 10 years when in the previous regime we had the Planning Commission taking a lead role in doing a lot of work on creating PPP frameworks. And in this process, I think all of us in the panel have done a lot of work in various sectors. My work has mostly been in the energy sector, in working out PPP frameworks. And what we've broadly seen, and it's also in the agenda of the session, is that PPP starts and ends with the expertise and the experience of the private sector and how that can come into creating world-class infrastructure. But in addition to that, I think I'd also like to say that the important part of PPP is that it can bring in scale which is presently not there in the government sector. And this scale is something which only can take place when people, when the public sector joins hand with the private sector. And last but not the least would be the ownership. So we've seen many instances where when the private sector comes in, the local community gets actively engaged in the process of developing and maintaining that asset. And that's another big important aspect of PPP. Throughout our careers, we've been working with various PPP frameworks, and in my view, probably the most important aspect of creating a successful PPP framework is risk balancing and how risk can be balanced between various stakeholders. Because unless that happens, capital will not flow into the sector, expertise will not flow into the sector. And there have been many misguided experiences in PPP which have served to teach the sector that unless the private sector is ring-fenced completely and given a very specific role, it cannot raise capital and it cannot implement and sustainably execute these projects. And we have a great panel with us today. So, on my right is Dr. Amit Bennett, who is the Chief of Party at Palladium, which is an international consulting firm, and his expertise is in the healthcare sector, so I would call him Dr. Amit Bennett, MD. So he has an experience in managing projects with USAID, DFID, BMGF, and many other international agencies, and we are very happy to have him here. To his right, we have Dr. Venkatraman. He's an associate professor in human resource management at the Faculty of Management Studies in the Delhi University. Again, an expert in the healthcare sector. Dr. Venkatraman has worked extensively with WHO, DFID, World Bank, and the European Commission in the areas of developing public-private partnerships, health policy, program evaluation, personnel management, and data analytics. So we're very happy to have Dr. Venkatraman here. To his right is Mr. Dhruva Purkayastha, and he is also on his way to becoming a Dr. Dhruva Purkayastha. He is presently pursuing his PhD in capital markets. He recently, on the 15th of this month, he quit with the World Bank Group. And he's considered an expert in the sector. He's been on many government panels on PPP. In a career spanning over 20 years, he has worked with manufacturing, rating, credit, financial services, and has spent the last 6 years in the World Bank Group. And joining me to his right is the only other non-doctor on the panel, which is... It's not here.
I am
Okay. Right. Oh, is it? Okay, fabulous. So, Dr. Namrata Jaitly, who is the head of programs at Charity Aid Foundation India, and as everyone knows, it's one of the largest NGOs in the country, and she has more than 20 years of multifunctional experience in empowering marginalized communities and strengthening capacity building and knowledge generation initiatives. At CAF, Ms. Jaitly is responsible for end-to-end management of CAF India's grant-making programs of corporate clients and individual donors. We are very, very happy to have her here. So the way we would structure this is that we can start off by having a quick presentation by each of the panelists, and subsequent to all the presentations, maybe we can have a round of questions, and then we can summarize the discussion. So, Dr. Amit, would you like to?
My presentation is more around experiences with clinics and small clinics basically in rural areas because the work that we do, Palladium and with DFID, USAID and of course BMGF is more around how can we work with those small clinics, small nursing homes, allopathic, non-allopathic towards RM and CH plus A or health goals. Palladium is a group of companies and we do many things. In between, we started with impact investing as Shravan just talked about. How can we get capital also flowing to these connects so that we have some impact also, impact investing also flowing to the smaller and rural areas. We have worked, as I said, basically in different countries, in India also, on developing local capacity. We mentor them, we handhold agencies, and then we withdraw after a period of time when they have achieved a kind of sustainable level of implementation. We also support governments in implementing public-private partnership, and I will just share experiences from that. We all know, and private sector is required. A large proportion of rural services is being catered to by the health sector, and there is a high shortfall of doctors, as Amitabh also talked about in the presentation earlier. That wherever there is a balance, there might be a good quality private sector, but where there is not a balance, private sector thrives. And of course, there is a health system. Because of its distance, because of its accessibility and availability barriers, it always imposes barriers to the poor to access services. So Palladium has been working on social marketing, for example, which came up as applying the principles of commercial marketing, 4 Ps, as any quarter marketing person will know: price, product, place, promotion, onto how can we improve that for health products and services in the rural areas. And we had various projects, we have them online, anybody can access the documents. And I'll just go on right now because of the time constraints and sense of right to the nitty-gritty of what we want to present. Of course, there is an ideological opposition within the two sectors. I mean, in public sector, they think that they don't have information in the private sector. Private sector is not following the quality. Public sector itself is so much burdened with their own programs, monitoring and implementing their own programs. They don't have time to work with the private sector. And of course, whenever people have worked with the private sector, there has been operational inefficiencies, either in delay in contracts, delay in procurement, delay in fees being given, reimbursements being given on time. Even if the government gave advance, you still have to have a collateral to get an advance. So either you put your building at risk or you take loans from a bank to give their collateral. On the private sector side, they say that the remuneration which is coming is too small, there is infrastructure limitation, there are doubts about quality of care, and of course there is limited ability among social agencies to work with this private sector. I will just come to that in the following slides. Whatever has been tried to solve the supply and the demand side. Either create publicly owned supply models or to contract out public priorities to private sector to deliver, or give them a purchasing power to the community like the health insurance in the RSPY, or provide incentives like we have the JSY scheme, conditional cash transfers. They want to work with the private sector also. And these are the models which Dr. Venkatraman will also share. Health insurance is coming in between, or is coming in a big way. RSPY is the biggest public-private partnership model in the world actually. It's got the largest number of private facilities also. Now I'll just share in the sense that the marketing project that we talked about, there is a big barrier because when governments rolls out social marketing or contracts out private sector, they do it only with 1 or 2 products. So either condom or pills, for example, in family planning, because they don't have the capacity to roll out with a wider range of ORS, zinc, or maybe other methods like, for example, sanitary napkins also. They don't do social marketing for that, or they don't have contracts rolling out where public can give contracts for that. And similarly, there is limited focus on demand generation. Whatever rolls out is focus on numbers. So over a period of time, numbers have helped to establish the government brands. But what has it done is that it has kind of crowded out or pushed out the private sector or the private sector brands from the rural areas. So because there is a whole lot of undercutting which happens to win those government contracts, the private sector gets pushed out. There is a price cap also now put, for example, on essential drugs like condoms and pills, which are public health or priority drugs, which then of course makes the commercial sector also run away from the rural areas, because these are tended to be the terrain of the government financed private sector programs or government financed public sector programs. In fact, this is the kind of differential that we are seeing. Just the state of Bihar, the population is only 11% urban. But look at the condom market. This is a whole private commercial. Whatever condoms are being sold in the market, 37 million equivalent to rural population, 38 million is being sold in the urban market. Whereas urban is only 11% of the total population. Similarly, the pills also, oral contraceptive pills, is only 1.85 million as compared to 1.95 million. In Orissa, there might be a better ratio, but still, Orissa still has 83% of rural population, but only a slightly higher 26 million condom. This is after 15-20 years of government supported, government financed private sector marketing programs. So what is the real challenge? Products are really dispersed. There are all shops in the rural areas also. You try to work with different markets, but in the end it all points to this particular person who kind of is transferring the product. He can take condom in a pack in a kind of on his bicycle, but it's difficult for him to take sanitary napkins because it's a big, large volume, and he might even fall while taking the. So we have supply chain problems in the rural areas because this is sparsely populated or variegated population. If you talk about services, you kind of making it access to the population. We tried out in rural areas. What works, the last mile coverage is actually handled by government has started Ashas, but if you leave them, if you kind of give them the entrepreneur skills, marketing skills, build their business capacity, they have the greatest ability to deliver or improve demand for public health priorities also, and they can work with private sector based on market-based models to bring in clients. We also worked with the PPPs that were there for accreditation, for example. But the application process requires a pollution control certificate from the clinic. It requires a pharmacist certificate. There are 14 set of certificates even required from a clinic just to enroll on a public-private partnership scheme. It takes about 1 to 6 months. There is advanced requirement which doesn't get fulfilled, and there is about $3,000 to $6,000 per clinic pending over a period of 6 to 7 months. We talk about health insurance. But then again, the focus has been on semi-urban areas. They still not reached the rural areas because there are no allopathic providers, or there are not enough allopathic providers in the rural areas. So because Ayush is not recognized among the health insurance systems, so they don't empanel them. And then of course there's always there's an involvement of various stakeholders. Now it is coming to health department. Till now RSPY was with labor department. But there are of course challenges now transferring from the health department into the health department. One thing which has worked is if you invest in quality assurance, whether through intermediaries or through other people, the clinic themselves, the private sector will respond to that quality initiatives and the demand being created. So what the government should do is just create demand, just invest in demand creation and quality regulation. The clinic will themselves expand to supply that demand. The clinics will immediately bring those equipments like these OT tables, 10 tables, or shadowless lamps which are required in operation theatre. Where will respond to increase in quality? This is, we've seen the work well, that government should not work in subsidizing the price, but maybe just work in investing in demand creation and quality. This is how figures have improved in the last 7 years. Private sector is working, government sector is limiting in the sense of it has not been able to cater to the increase in population also. Whether it's a public health method or whether it's a method which traditionally has been a private sector method like spacing methods or family planning and so on. So what next? Shravan also said in the playing, can we get these social franchising models to get business orientation? But the problem is that most of the NGOs are run by people who do not have business skills. It's difficult for the whole culture to change from the top level to the lower level into profit making or into sustainability at that level. And I'm not talking about profits of 30%. Just profit of 6 to 7% can help them make them sustainable. But it's a kind of a different skill set because all they are waiting for is the next grant to come in. And it's easier to get next grant always sometimes. Then we work the other way around. Can we get the largest commercial hospitals to get into rural areas? But the problem is you can't reach the impact because they will come with only 6 hospitals maybe or 7 hospitals in the whole country. They can't reach up to, for example, 300 clinics which are required in the state of Bihar to be set up in the rural areas. And that can only be achieved by, again, smaller group of hospitals. So we thought, can we go for impact investment flowing to these clinics? They said, no, most of the time we got impact investment to flow. The franchisor, who are basically HLF PPTs or if you know PSI, they are kind of franchisors who are NGOs. Impact investment doesn't flow to these kind of people because they require for-profits to be there. And the last point, impact investors will run away if the cost model or the recovery model is based on government flow funds to come in. They will not like government funds to be there, they will like full recovery from consumers. Those are the kind of models that they would like to invest in. So anything related to the government, they scare away or they shy away. So then the capital doesn't flow for improvement of their quality and so on. We are now trying something which is called development impact bonds. That can become an intermediary. A for-profit can become an intermediary to supply to these clinics and raise investor money. And once, as people are talking about, outcomes are achieved by these people, the government funds only the outcomes. So the government doesn't fund the input level for the whole year. At the end of the year, you just fund the outcomes, and then people get paid, and there is a premium being paid back to the investor. So that's the kind of model which we are trying to, take up with the government of Rajasthan. We have been working in it for the last 15 months. It's currently with the finance department in the government of Rajasthan. They are very positive about it because the government itself right now is about outcomes being achieved and so on. There's also another thing which is coming up now, which is called creating shared value. Business being business, can business make health or can business make public health priorities part of its value chain? So somebody like Unilever, if it does water filters, that's actually creating shared value. And for its water filter, if it's create a financing arm so that water filters get more accessible to the population or affordable to the population, that's again business flowing down with, and public health goals also being hit. GE Healthcare has come up with ultrasounds, neonatal newborn equipment. Now they know these kind of equipments are not affordable to the small clinics. So they started with a financing arm to make them affordable to the clinics. So again, it's redefining productivity in the value chain, working directly and starting a financing arm also in addition to the equipment and diagnostics part. So what are the main lessons that we are seeing? One is you have to, the enabling environment means that work on regulations, work on quality, work on demand generation, don't subsidize. Try to change the rules of the game in the sense that get insurance players in, improve insurance coverage. As you create demand, the supply level will also respond to it. Support function is, nobody used smartphone till they started using it. So unless until you show the community that this is what is good for you, they will not start demanding it. But once you show them and once you just make a pilot of it, that this is what is good quality healthcare, they will start demanding it on its own. So the community demand is also a big area in the sense which supply level will also respond to. Those are key takeaways which we discussed. Just sharing one example, which Indonesia, most of the rural areas that I see is like Indonesia. They are sparsely, they are all a group of islands. Rural areas, the villages are also dispersed. It's very difficult to get a health center for 1,000 population or 2,000 population. Indonesia for the last 15 years has had social health insurance programs trying to cover the whole population. What has happened in the last 15 years? If you see the out-of-pocket coverage or out-of-pocket expenditure or even utilization, it has never dropped in spite of the country being health insurance coverage by 100%. In fact, it dropped for some period of time, it is again increasing out-of-patient expenses. Why? Because many people say the supply side was never ready, though they started creating demand for it. So you have to wait for the supply side also to come in. Supply side will come in once you start insurance regularly with demand creation for those services. Of course, people have talked about in the morning, Coca-Cola was, innovation is not always a new thing. It can always also be the same thing. We have to get better in implementation. Coca-Cola was not for Coca-Cola, it was for neuralgia and depression cure. When it was designed, it got, the first time it came into the market, it even cures your indigestion and diarrhea. Now, of course, Coca-Cola is a big giant. Currently, latest, Coca-Cola can also dissolve your gastric obstruction. It is being tried as the first line of treatment. And now Coca-Cola is also the supply chain is being used in Zambia for getting ORS and zinc out into the markets. Thank you.
Thank you so much for an excellent presentation, Dr. Amit. I think one of the things that interested me most was the concept of impact bonds, and probably there will be more questions on that later. Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Venkataraman to make his presentation.
Well, first of all, I am extremely delighted to see a lot of young people here who perhaps getting introduced to the entire concept of public-private partnership. Thank you, Shravan, and I also thank you, Sambodhi, to give me this opportunity to share my thoughts about last 13 years, what I have been trying to do in the health sector. My focus on PPP is particularly and restricted to only health sector. Like Amit would like to also say the same thing. Let me start off by saying this. Very often we tend to have this notion of PPP. PPP is every possible interaction between government and the private sector tends to be treated, or at least bandied, as somebody pointed out in the last panel, as PPP. I think we need to be very careful about the characteristics of PPP, which is not necessarily that you just tender a particular activity of a government, it becomes a PPP. You need to be careful about why you would like to engage the private sector. Is there a problem of access? Is there a problem of efficiency? Is there a problem of quality? Is there a problem, or rather you would like to reduce the out-of-pocket expenses? There begins the possible key performance indicators that you set aside for designing a contract. And that's how I start looking at. You need to have a clear definition of what constitutes the private sector engagement and for what. What is the value that you are wanting to get out of the private sector engagement? One of the most important thing that one must keep in mind is that PPP is not for all kinds of activities. One need to be careful and delineate very carefully that PPP has to have some particular purpose. Let's take a simple example. Bain's report, recent report of 2015 says that India requires 6 million additional beds, hospital beds. Now, any one of you work in the health sector will know that for a super specialty hospital to invest in one single bed, it can be up to 1 crore. That's about 10 million rupees. Now, where are you going to get the funds from? Who is going to invest into this? So the first cell that you see is that there is a great deal of opportunity for PPP in infrastructure creation. India requires, again, we go back to the IBF data, which suggests that India will require an addition of at least about 575,000 doctors. Now, where are we going to get that kind of a medical college infrastructure? Now, whenever you talk about infrastructure, PPP, it has a complete different kind of a design and a risk apportionment. On the other hand, we have large number of primary health centers. Do you know that about 25 to 30% of primary health centers are unmanned? And in many, 92% of specialists in community health centers are absent or vacant. Now, where are you going to bring people to operate them? When you build a hospital, as in the city of Delhi, there are 2 big hospitals built with almost 700 crore rupees. One is called Tahirpur, another one is in Janakpuri. And they are not operational except OPD. In the city of Delhi, if you don't get specialists to come and work for you, who is going to manage this investment? So you have a second model, which is service delivery, part of PPP. Then you have possibly an alternate source of financing options by pre-purchasing the services. There you could have insurance-based instruments, both on the demand side instrument as well as supply side instrument. And then you have other possible hybrid versions, franchising, social marketing, or telemedicine, telehealth, etc. These are all, you just have to hang a canvas and you can paint a wonderful picture of your own, depending upon what's the objective of your PPP. Having said that, we have in the last 20 years or less than 20 years, we have traveled a long way in piloting a number of PPPs. Starting from the primary health center that Karuna Trust, that's one of the first primary health centers in the country, Gumbahalli. And then you have a community health center in Shamlaji, which is in Gujarat. Then you have a Raichur super speciality, Rajiv Gandhi super speciality hospital in Raichur. Then you have Bombay Municipal Corporation Hospital, it's called BSCS Hospital. Then you have co-location model in Dehradun. These are what we call it as O&M contracts, operation and maintenance or operations and management contracts. The second kind of a range of services delivery PPPs are related to telemedicine. That's a Cisco model in Raichur. Then you have Rajiv Arogya scheme in Andhra Pradesh. Then you have Chiranjeevi scheme in Gujarat. Then you have Yashaswini scheme in Karnataka. Then you have Sambhav voucher scheme in Uttarakhand. Then you have RSBY. This is the second models of second range of PPPs. Then you have something like a mobile health van, you have a rural teleconnect for the tuberculosis diagnosis, you have 108, you have SMS hospital in Jaipur which had a radiological services on contract. So there aren't, we have plenty of evidence, we have plenty of pilots. In fact, I should say that SMS Hospital has been an harbinger for a large number of medical radiological services going on PPP. Now, these are available models, and what are the lessons from these models which are very important for researchers like us? I am an academic and I also get involved into designing contracts. And what are the challenges? Some of these are to be, because very often people make a huge commentary, and the comment that they make is PPPs are plenty but they all fail. Without evidence, how can you make that statement that it fails? I mentioned I was in one of the UHC meeting, and where one of the very learned person, NHRC director, earlier erstwhile director, makes this statement that 20 years we have had PPPs which are all over failing. The problem is that if you don't know how to drive, why do you buy a car? That's the status at which we are. We haven't understood the entire complexities and nuances of PPP, and then we bandy it saying that, or we put them together as a category of failures. PPP doesn't fail. We as people who manage such kind of arrangements, we fail the entire process. I'll tell you how. Number one, most PPPs in the health service delivery as of today are what we call it as relational contracts. A good bureaucrat with a good intention and an NGO or a private sector person with good intention, they come together, they dialogue, they talk to one another, then they create a contract and it runs well. The moment the bureaucrat goes out, the next bureaucrat comes and says that why should I follow my predecessor's one footstep? Much of the failure is due to such kind of a temporary arrangements, ad hocism. The second, there are 29 states in this country, out of which at least about 27 states, private sector is predominant provider of services. You just have to go to NSS data, you will find that. Not a single state has dedicated unit for private sector. There isn't a single directorate of health services in this country which has a dedicated unit for private sector or private sector engagement. Not a single state has a policy related to the private sector. Now, how can you then put the onus on private sector for the failure of PPP? The third, if you go to any of the government setup and ask who am I supposed to ask for where is the release of my payment, who is supposed to give the contract, answerable to some of the clinical audit or medical audit that you do. Again, there isn't a single institutional framework within which the PPP can work. This flows from the broad perspective that somehow public health facilities and the ministries of health or the Directorate of Health Services are custodians of only the public health facilities. Civil Aviation Minister is not the Minister of Air India alone. is a Minister of Civil Aviation. Unfortunately, in Indian context, much of the health system happens to be, or health department happens to be custodian of only the public health system. And as a result, we never paid attention towards the private sector. 80 to 85% of private providers in India are individuals. And if you are wanting to have any kind of a contract with them, remember, input-based contract, L1-based contract is what governments are very comfortable with. And governments are not comfortable transacting individuals. Payment delays, this is a universal problem. Why there is a payment delay? Because you have not earmarked a separate budget for engaging the private sector. And therefore, almost everywhere you see there is a payment delay. We know that the ecosystem in this country is not favorable towards the private sector. We accept the private sector in every domain, but when it comes to health and education, somehow there is a reluctance. During my last years of experience, I have been accused or abused in several forums. And in one forum, it became so animated, and I had to ask the person who was asking the question, where do you send your children for schooling? So in our private domain, private sector is wonderful. When it comes to public debate, private sector is bad. Why is this kind of a dubious or a diabolical approach towards the private sector? I don't understand. Risk of working with the government. Remember, private sector is not too happy to work with the government, because government, even if one paise accounting problem, they will send their entire vigilance team to the NGO. It's not that the private sector is keen to work with the government. It is in fact the other way around. The government is much more desperate to work with the government, because who is mandated to provide health services? On the one side, like Amitabh Kant or maybe Shravan would, Sampath will have this perspective about PPP, it's all about infrastructure. But when you go and speak to the health officials at the district level, they'll say, PPP would mean we will lose the job. PPP would mean that the privatization. It's a backdoor entry of the private sector. So all of them are fearful about this entire concept of PPP, primarily because the lack of understanding about this notion of, remember, without public sector, there is no possibility of PPP. Public sector is equally a partner in any kind of a PPP arrangement. Political ambivalence, every government, remember the same government as of today in Delhi government, 2 years back they were screaming about the private sector. Today they are talking very cordially towards the private sector, wanting to set up some pathological labs. So when you are in power, you make some noise. When you are in opposition, you make some other noise. All right, I think the major point that I am wanting to say is that a lot of today's debate on private sector or partnership happens to be rhetoric. I think we need to go into hardcore evidence. Some of the hardcore evidence is like this. In the last 2 years back, I was going back to something that I did about 10 years back. In 2003 and 4, I was running around the country looking for private sector PPP models of various health sector service delivery. You can look at my website and you will find those case studies. Again, 2 years back, I went back to these places and I tried to find some 60 patients who were coming to PPP facility. How much did they save money by coming to a PPP arrangement? In Uttarakhand mobile health van that I showed you those pictures, we found that people who came for the PPP, that is mobile health van, were spending just about 250 rupees for an ultrasound. But when they went to a government health facility, they were spending 700 rupees in Haldwani. Do you know why? You would be thinking that it is free. How can they be spending 700 rupees? They have to go 2 days. First day and the second day to get the report and see the doctor. 2 days of loss of wages, 2 days of an accompanying person, 2 days transportation. When you guys as students do this costing exercise, out-of-pocket expenditure, look at that as an impact. You saw the performance of Karuna Trust, which was shown on the award function. Every PPP facility seemed to perform somewhat better than the neighboring public hospitals. Something is happening, but we are not gathering evidence about it because we miss the baseline data. Because when we give the contract, when the government assigns an NGO or a private sector, we never develop a database on which this performance could be measured. One of the things that I have been trying to really talk about to various governments is this, that PPP will continue to come to be a grinding halt if we don't develop these ecosystem. What is the ecosystem? The first is institutional framework, legal, policy, and capacity. Second, we need to also invest highly into accreditation. How can I contract a private sector hospital without them having some minimal essential quality certification? The third most important one is, right now we do a lot of licensing. Pure students of economics will understand licensing and regulation is much more than simply registration. What we have today is just about registration of private sector. And remember, most of our states, for example, you take Delhi Nursing Home Act. Do you know how old it is? Bombay Nursing Home Act. Do you know how old it is? One is of 1949, another one is 1952. But what is stopping us from implementing it? One of the provisions of this act is that you cannot establish a private sector hospital or a clinic in a residential area. Implement that and you will see how many nursing homes get closed in Delhi. And therefore, when you don't do that, you put the onus onto PPP and say that that's failing. If you need to read more about it, read through this. I've said a lot of things about what's happening in Indian context. One of the things that I was just trying to, just a couple of seconds, one of the things that I wanted to really highlight to you is this. A couple of years back, I was doing a World Bank study. I was sponsored by World Bank, research study. We were trying to do a study on comparative efficiency of a PPP hospital with government hospitals. We made a comparison of 5 PPP hospitals with the 5 neighboring government hospitals. Before we made a template to compare the contracts of some of these operation management contracts, we went to various, Australia, for example, World Bank's own IPAF facility. We tried to collate an ideal contract. How many items of contract clauses must be mentioned? And we developed a frame, item-wise, 178 items should be minimally included. What we found in the best of Indian contract is 75. Only 75 items out of the 178 items are included. So when we start off with that premise that can we compare the efficiency of these two sets of such a research study, you are limited with the kind of contract design itself. So when I am making a comparison of my research with any global evidence, I am bereft of the kind of a minimal conditionalities in which the entire contract or even the foundations on which the research could be done. So these are some of the challenges when you take up any study on private sector engagement, contracting or PPP. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for a very impactful and wise presentation. You took us back to our business school days. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Next, I'd like to invite Dhruva Kokayasta to make his presentation.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Rahul. I don't have a presentation. Let me just try and stick to the theme. Forging partnerships for a greater impact. First, I think Professor Venkatraman's presentation started with health, and it dealt with all possible operational issues that can possibly happen in beyond health in a lot of other sectors. I've seen PPPs across sectors. I really don't have any depth of experience as far as the other panelist is concerned, as far as health is concerned. But let me step back and try and look at public-private partnerships more from a forging partnerships point of view, as to where it started. And if you look at the short paragraph written, also it talks about health, it talks about skills, it talks about public service delivery areas, and talks about infrastructure. So what is happening? Why this PPPs? And what are we seeing here? The world has not started or thought of doing any PPPs in manufacturing chocolates or manufacturing automotives, right? Because we know PPPs. So what's the whole story around it? At an academic level, while all the operational problems presented on contracts, on perceptions of private sector, public sector, so we have something underlying, which is what the economic construct of PPPs are being looked at solutions of where there is a market failure. It's a market's fail. So you are not having the private sector investments happening and the markets are not functioning. So either there are huge positive externalities or possibly fair bit of two very, I'm getting a bit academic, but either these two issues of adverse selection or moral hazards are there, and they're very much there in health. So we have a situation of these sectors where there is an attempt to forge partnerships, but then for what? So the first defining construct is where public-private partnership, where the government needs to provide or where markets fail. It's a combination of both. What is it? So we see PPPs in health, infrastructure, now in skill development, partly in education. You're trying to look at jails, sort of a lot of other social sectors. You're looking at public-private partnerships. I'll give you an example, simple example of saying, if you look at telecom, which started probably as infrastructure is a corporate play today. If you look at electricity, and if you think of electricity in public-private partnerships today, the grid would be redundant 10 years from today, because you will not need the grid possibly 10 years from today. So then it does not remain anymore a transmission PPP. So we are looking at, so there are basically three drivers. A, is it because of private sector efficiency? Do we believe that private sector is more efficient than the public sector and government? And going by broad data and broad understanding that the panelists have, and what we can think is probably yes. Actually, there's no hard data to substantiate this globally in state-owned corporations, but let's assume for the practical purpose that the private sector is more efficient. And therefore, we want the private sector to, we means the world as a whole, and we, at the end of the day, it's this government, because the government is supposed to provide public goods. As Prof said, and rightly so, it is their job, and they want the private sector to come in. So they want the private sector to come in. So why do they want the private sector to come in? Is it for efficiency? Is it for money? Or is it for both? So if it is efficiency, if it's for financing, or is it for technology, R&D, innovation, research, sum total of that can sort of blend into efficiency in the way you can think about it. So first level, we need to be clear about why PPPs. Is it money or is it private sector efficiency? I think that is the point at which the government which brings PPPs onto the table is unclear. It's completely unclear, and I agree with you on these aspects. There's a complete lack of clarity as to why we are wanting PPPs in the first place. Now, when you want the PPPs to come in the first place, then comes the second point. I'm just trying to get them relate to what Prof spoke. Again, So the second level, what we are trying is, A, we want the private sector to come in. We are not very clear, is it money? At some points of time, there is enough money, poor implementation in the government. Whether it is health or roads, more or less the constructs remain similar. So if it is for private sector efficiency, it's also for money, and then you conclude it is for all, sum total of all, because innovation, though funded by government globally, it's a private sector activity. Remember, most innovation in the world has been funded by government or initiated by government anywhere in the world. The internet itself is a government activity, the internet per se. Now when we come back to say, so the question is of risk. So somebody who takes an exposure, and this is exactly where I come back to what Professor Venkatraman said, is what is right. So it is a question of how much of profit, and the question of, I want to separate impact investments here. Very importantly, because the return required for impact investment, it's a blended capital, and somewhere let's keep that aside. Let's keep CSR aside, because then we will miss the point. The important point is over here to look at what is the right return for the right risk and the capital that's put in. Now, there lies, and there I will tie it up with Professor Venkatraman said very clearly, is to where is that government bureaucrat unable to get that? It is government institutionally across the world. I really don't know, but the two countries who are most evolved in PPPs are Canada and Australia, and they have gone through these phases. UK, yes, UK PFI initiative, it started as a PFI initiative, then called PPPs. But I think those people who have got it right most are Victoria, the state of Victoria, and Canada globally. They've got it very right, and we are trying to come and evolve from here. So, what is the right return on capital? And he should, and let's understand, and this is where perception becomes a problem. This is where we need to understand that much of return needs to be made by the private sector investors taking that much amount of risk. And this is where the difference, and it gets termed as profiteering, and that is exactly where these issues start happening. Private sector is making money. Is it a public service delivery? Therefore, the private sector should deliver it at lower costs and make less profit because it is healthcare. That is not correct. That is not the way to look at it. So you have to compensate the business for the right return on capital once more. So going ahead, I think, so therein lies the conceptual problem. I don't think I'll carry on with the implementation problem because it has been detailed exhaustively over here, and I do agree with implementation problems across the board. And I think it's important for governments, and I would include the multilateral institutions which are public sector funders, because it is not in their interest to get PPPs going. It is particularly incentive, and it's a question of alignment of incentives. At the same time, let me end with the last thing. Because there is a market failure, and because you will have the private sector here, the private sector is subject to moral hazards, whether we like it or not. And here, because you will have a monopoly area at some place, you need licensing and you need correct regulation to come in. So when you have good regulation to regulate that, that is the point when PPPs will exactly succeed. Which way you get the regulators to work. In some sectors, we have managed in quite well. In electricity, in telecom, we have done fairly well. Health sector, agreed, completely no. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabhat, for a very crisp presentation. You promised to stick to the theme at the start. I'm glad you also stuck to the time. I'd now like
because
to,
I didn't have a presentation.
I'd like next to invite Nandata to make her presentation.
I'm very conscious. I just have 5 minutes, and I don't want to eat on to others' time. Let me try see what justice I can do in 5-7 minutes. So very quickly, this is here. The theme is basically forging partnership for greater impact. And though we've talked about PPP for sustainable development, this slide basically talks about what is the relevance of having public-private partnership for sustainable development. I have taken the liberty of interpreting PPT slightly differently, sir, slightly in a more broader partnership mode, where I've talked about not only partnership between the government and corporate, but also NGOs and also the communities. So within that context, there is, and especially if you take it in the context of social development, significance of synergies in knowledge and resource for common purpose, specialized skills and talents of stakeholders. Those are the advantages if we really look at PPP for sustainable development. Larger financial pool, assisting in scalability and greater impact. Commitment to bring change, management tools, methodologies, and measurement capabilities. So basically, the three partners who come together, they have their strength areas, and together there is a lot of potential to leverage that to ensure sustainable development. Very quickly, what I would be doing here is just sharing about Charity Aid's foundation's work on really trying to have these three actors working together. And we are a registered non-for-profit working to promote the culture of giving since 1998. And our mission is basically to promote and support strategic giving. We do a lot of work with corporates, and that's where I would be able to focus my presentation on how can corporate civil society engagement be brought forward to enhance sustainable development and to converge with the ongoing government-supported interventions. Now, how we interpret partnerships is primarily how we help the corporates is we help them to do their strategy development. This is more in the context of the new the Companies Act, where they've made 2% spend for certain companies, mandatory for social development. So within that framework, that's how CAF India has been working to facilitate partnership. And the impact we have created, this is not to so much show what impact CAF has created, this is to show what potential there is if we have to take the corporates' money for social development. And we actually work with 50 corporate partners and 300 NGO partners to have a worth at least 160 crore has already been delivered for sustainable development. And these are some of the corporate partners who are already contributing to sustainable development within the sphere of health, education, water sanitation, livelihoods, sports, elderly care, health and nutrition, animal welfare, looking at vulnerable groups. So you would be surprised to know that actually there is this mandate where the corporate sector is coming beyond just doing infrastructure, but also going into wider things of environment and natural resource management, because our maximum fund comes from the corporate sector. Here, because the whole focus was on PPP, I would like to focus more on how the corporates and the civil society sector have come together to support some of the ongoing government interventions. And we've had very good success on corporates supporting the government's Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. And if you see the kind of corporates who joined in, and CAF was the managing partner for this campaign, we have corporates like Coke, Microsoft, Herbalife, Aircel, Wellspun, CB, Kohler, Aeon, all of them coming together. There were 44 corporate donors who worked with 44 NGO partners, and across 17 states. And we were actually able to provide sanitation facilities covering 307 schools and 13 crore worth investment. So that is the potential of really looking at a very viable partnership for social development interventions, where coming together you've been able to dovetail, get a lot of corporates in a particular campaign and support the government's intervention. Another quick example is we have an intervention where Herbalife India is supporting government schools, 82 government schools in the state of Gujarat, where the whole focus is on not only construction, renovation of sanitation facilities, but also maintenance of it. And they've also really looked at raising awareness on sanitation and hygiene practices in school. So again, the focus on infrastructure which Sir talked about. So the corporates are focusing a lot on infrastructure support as well as service delivery. Coca-Cola ran a very interesting campaign called Support My School, where they were supporting infrastructure support, which included issues like rainwater harvesting, access to safe drinking water, sanitation, sports, environmental conservation in schools, in government schools. And that has been, it's been a very important platform. And we had a whole range of donors contributing to it. Again, infrastructure support. We have another partner called Oracle, which is again looking at schools. So there's been, in our experience, a lot of the corporate partnership has been very successful, where they supplement the infrastructure support as well as the quality of services. So in the healthcare, it has been not very easy because, and we've not had too many corporates really coming forward to support health. But education, most of our examples are more from the whole component of education. There have been cases where the corporates have also now started supporting integrated village development. So really looking at the local government, strengthening the local government and dovetailing the resources to support bottom-up planning and looking at issues of education, health, wash, livelihood. And we've got corporates like the HDFC Ergo, which has actually sponsored they've identified 4 schools and they're dovetailing and converging with the government rather than replicating. So what are some of the partnership learnings from our experience? One is that the enabling policy environment has actually helped in forging this partnership where we have corporates mandated to spend 2% of their, and there's a large willingness of the corporates to support government interventions. There have been successes where alignment of the cause has been with the corporate identity. They've really looked at convergence for sustainability, greater infrastructure and hardware engagement has been there. And there's been an important, slowly there's been a change where corporates are also looking at long-term investments and not looking at only supporting 1 year or 2 year projects. It works where you have mutual trust and respect, where the corporates do not look at the NGOs only as vendors, and where the government does not look at corporates as competitors, but more as supplementing their financial gaps as well as service. So we've had cases where the corporates have actually paid for the salary of certain, to supplement the salary of, let's say, the sweeper who comes, so really supplementing that component, and this whole component of engaging employees. So very quickly, this is what our experience has been from TAF India, and I hope I've been able to supplement some of the components which my panelists have already raised on public-private partnership. I hope I've been on time. Thanks.
Please, a loud round of applause for that. But thank you so much, Namrata. I think introducing the concept of an NGO, I think, is very interesting. And also to talk about corporates in the context of giving, while most people think of them only in the context of taking. So it's great that that perspective could also be provided. It would be nice if we could get some questions from the house so that we could ask our panelists.
Hi, many thanks for a very engaging discussion. My question is related to Mr. Dhruva. Sir, you mentioned that Canada, Australia, and to a certain extent Great Britain as well are the so-called knights in shining armor when it comes to the whole PPP scheme of things. What do you think are the lessons that the Indian government and Indian private sector can learn from these countries, setting aside the obvious contextual factor, of course?
Thanks. Well, not really knights in shining armor. They've got their act right, so let's put it this way. There's also a learning curve around that. Okay, what needs to be learned is not essentially in the realm of PPP contract design or PPP implementation. See, there are some things required for confidence of private sector to make those investments and stay put on course. So what is required in India to learn is sanctity of contracts. So when you say contract enforcement, one, and if there is a dispute resolution, then you know how long the courts take in India. So that's point number one. Contracts are contracts and they have to be honored, even if the contracts were wrong. Now I'm sticking my neck out and saying, if you got into a wrong contract, you need to be honoring that. So that's what India needs to learn. Point number one. Point number two is, if there is a dispute that needs to be resolved in a judicial process or a quasi-judicial process within a reasonable time frame, and lastly, there needs to be an exit if things have gone wrong. These are three things, which is not really necessarily in the realm of just PPP.
This question is not directed to any particular. I just wanted to know more about the fourth P, which is the people's participation, if you call it, or the community participation, or engaging with panchayats or municipalities in such models. Do you have any experience of, where basic services have been imparted through these models and where the communities have been engaged?
I think there are two things that one need to be wary about. PPPs are professional contracts, and the larger the number of stakeholders, the more issues of control and monitoring and its own supervision. I remember Karna Trust when it began to operate Kumbali primary health care center. They were blocked on the road by the people because there was a rumor that the government is now giving away the entire primary health center facilities to NGOs or the private sector. And they are not going to be, they will be charged. So it took about 3 months for the Karna Trust to convince the Panchayat people and also the leaders there that this is not that thing. Despite the Karna Trust and Sudarshan being such a popular figure, it took him 3 months. So a lot of this, often when people can create a rumor about the private sector, it happened, I remember even with Raichur Hospital, where a politician came and made a statement in a public meeting that the people this hospital is exploiting the people, etc. One needs to be very careful about to what extent the community participation and the community views and their own, whether they can actually engage in monitoring their value for services, value for money services that they are being, the private sector has been engaged. There is an element of possibility. But mindset is very difficult to change. One episode of a patient not being treated well, bricks fall onto that hospital or the operators. And that's what he was mentioning about. You take these national highway projects. Why many toll booths are being uprooted or where there is a violence? There is some element of a lack of the understanding about what constitutes this transaction that had happened between the private party and the government. So it can lead to such kind of a vulnerability. That's what one of the caution that I can give you. But the problem is, in India, the private sector, when we talk about in the health sphere, only 2% of our health providers are corporate hospitals. Alright? Only 7,000 NGOs are in the healthcare delivery providers. This is National Commission on Macroeconomics. That's the data. With so limited number of organized people in the health service delivery, you are reliant upon nursing homes and the Chiranjeevi scheme. All that they asked was a certificate that you needed to have a OT, you needed to have an anesthetist. So it's difficult in this kind of circumstances to put together this partnership. So there is a challenge. I think it will continue to pose as a challenge.
And I think that's where NGOs come in, because they can act as a channel or a point to diffuse the pressure that is building the local society or the local community and enable people to participate in the project in a more structured manner.
Hi, my name is Vijay. I'm a researcher at Sambodhi. Actually, I have a question for Shravan. He hasn't presented, but I have seen his videos a couple of times and actually wanted to have your take on PPP in the energy sector.
Right, so this is a bit of out of syllabus because I didn't talk. But I have a couple of observations on the presentations made so far. And the first is that the energy sector has been a shining example of how PPP can succeed. And we have seen some massive power generation, transmission capacity additions because of the involvement of the private sector. And I think one of the important things is, Dr. Venkatraman said it very well. He said everything that he said are reasons for PPP not working. Most of them have been fixed in the energy sector. There is a very clear apportionment of risk between the various parties. So every investor knows exactly what happens in case something goes wrong. There are exit provisions available in case the project does not happen, and that can include up to 100% of debt due, or 130% in case he is not at fault. Payment defaults are covered. There are interest obligations in case the payment is delayed, and there are letters of credit, escrow accounts in place which are there. Most importantly, there's a very clear regulatory mechanism which, by Indian standards, is quite quick as well. The judgment comes in a couple of years or so, which I think is fairly good by Indian standards. So all those issues broadly have been addressed in a structured manner, and all of that started with the Act, the Electricity Act itself, which created a structured framework way back in 2003 in a sector which could have been complicated because it was a concurrent subject. It was not a subject in the hands of the central government alone. But the framework was created right then, and since then things have been followed. And I think most of the issues in that space have been resolved. And possibly that's a model or a template which can be taken forward to other sectors, at least in the infrastructure space. I think as you rightly observed, sir, that may not apply to the services space, but certainly in creation of large-scale capacity infrastructure, maybe that's a model that can be looked at.
I have a question for the panelists. Dhruva also mentioned when we were discussing about PPP that we need to keep CSR aside. I'm not very sure that I got the point correctly there or not. Even Namrata also mentioned the involvement of the corporates here. My question here is there a distinguishing line between CSR activities and PPP, or are they merged together?
Okay, let me go. Okay, I think what I wanted to mean very clearly is not undermine CSR or impact investing, because that's not. But we need to be able to compartmentalize that, and whether we call it PPP, whether we call it private participation, CSR, that's it. The results attained may be public service delivery, that's not the issue. What we are talking of, and at least I'm sure Professor Venkatraman will agree, what we are talking of over here is the private commercial capital getting invested. So that private commercial capital needs to earn its rightful return, and that's very clear. The price of money has three parts to it. One, the price of time. Two, the price of known losses. And three, the price of unknown losses. These three have to be covered. And the price of unknown losses become very, very high moment the uncertainties of what will happen and what can be provided and what can go wrong. And that is the reason private sector goes out. And this is, the government does not understand this.
I guess the CSR can cover PPP, but the problem is that PPPs are professional contracts, right? And whereas CSR funds so far limits that particular engagement because CSR is meant to augment a particular sector, whether through the private sector or through NGO, but there isn't a professional contract, isn't it? The organization which is supporting through the CSR funds is not expecting value for money, right? Whereas a government contracting, let's say radiological services, it's definitely looking for that. If I were to pay you per capita basis or by global budget model, can I really reduce my budgetary implications? There is that element of it.
CSR, the Act also, they clearly state, Schedule 7, there is in the Act, which states which are the activities which will come under the CSR mandate.
Just to add one last point here. See, the key to understand is when I meant government, and I was referring to the implementing agency. Governments is a very confused, wider term. To correct myself, I meant the implementing agency which gets into getting these PPP contracts in place, and that's where the confusion happens. But let's understand that this very, very clearly. When government spends that money, it is spending that money not to get any return on capital. It is basically spending that money for outcomes and development outcomes, and so is CSR spend about. Is for buying or delivering those outcomes. When there is a commercial investment which is there in a PPP contract, that's for making returns on capital.
So in the development jargon, we'll say social return on investment for CSR.
Okay, thank you so much for joining in, and this was a great panel. I think we should be particularly grateful to Sambodhi because only when the discussion unfolded, we found that there was so much diversity in views. We had the academia, we had the professionals, we had industry, we had NGOs. So it was a very enriching discussion. So thank you, Sambodhi, for giving this opportunity.